What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Coach Steve Show podcast, where we discuss everything in college football, NFL, Chicago Bears, Illini sports, a little bit of NBA here and there, everything in sports. Talk to football coaches all over the United States. So, if any of that interests you, please hit the like button and the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. The podcast can be found anywhere you listen to your podcasts, literally anywhere in audio form. So, please follow them, rate them, be a friend, tell a friend. All that good stuff. Please and thank you. It helps out the algorithm that I don't understand, but it helps everything. So please and thank you so much. This podcast is brought to you by the Belly Up Sports Podcast Network. If you go to bellyupsports.com, check out all the blogs and podcasts and things on there. Thank you, Belly Up Sports, for having this podcast there. Again, bellyupsports.com. Check out everything there. Betting season is in full swing, and if you head over to mybookie.ag to make your same game parlays, in-game bets, money lines, and you're brand new, you make your very first deposit. If you use the code BELLYUPFANTASY, all one word, it's going to double your first deposit. That is free money, and everybody loves free money. We know this during the past 2 years. Everybody loves free money. So again, mybookie.ag. If you're brand new, your very first deposit, BELLYUPFANTASY, all one word, is going to double your first deposit. Lets them know that the Belly Up Sports Podcast Network sent you. So mybookie.ag, Belly Up Fantasy is the code to double your first deposit. Go make some bets to retire. We all want to retire. Go make some money. This podcast is also brought to you by Coach Stone Football, and it's back to the basics, books, and drills. If you go to coachstonefootball.com, check out all of his books on football drills, practice planning, game planning, and much, much more. Literally, you will never have to look up another football drill again. His very first book is over 500 pages, and there's a bunch of others, back to the basics, just drills, offense, defense, game planning, everything like that. So if you go to coachstonefootball.com and get all that, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Coach Stone, for sponsoring the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about two different things. We are going to discuss a couple bowl games that happened. I'm going to title this, Should Auburn Have Kept Gus? We're going to talk about Auburn versus Houston. And then we're going to discuss, unfortunately, the Mississippi State game versus Texas Tech. It did not go the way I thought it was going to go. If it went a certain way, this podcast would be titled differently, but, it is what it is. So we're going to discuss the Mississippi State versus Texas Tech first, and then we'll get into, should Auburn have kept Gus? Okay, so it got announced when the bowl games were coming out that Mississippi State was going to be playing Tech. Now, this is a big deal, and to some people, it may not be a big deal if you're not a huge college football person, not a huge fan, and maybe you don't pay attention to things. But the head coach of Mississippi State, of course, is Mike Leach. He was the head coach of the Texas Tech Red Raiders way back in the day. So he was there from 2000 or 2001 to 2009 or 10. He led them to 10 bowl games. I believe he's one of the winningest, if not the most winningest football coach there of all time. It was going to be the first time Mike Leach faces the Red Raiders after Texas Tech officials fired him in December 2009 for alleged mistreatment of a player suffering a concussion. They have not paid him for his last year, so that's where the big talk was. Texas Tech officials claim they fired Leach with cause and owed him nothing. And so that's why it was a huge game. Anybody that are Mike Leach fans, Air Raid fans, anything like that, this was going to be a huge time game. He's never coached against Texas Tech since this happened. And we all know that the quote-unquote misconduct of a player was not true. It's in his book. It's not true. And it was like court or anything like that. It's not true. There's videos proving that he did not do it. So they just did it because they were kind of tired of him. I believe Mike Leach said that someone told him that when you become a head coach, there's an hourglass. You become less popular every year, no matter what you win. When they had asked Texas Tech about it, they claim that they fired him with cause. They owe him nothing. Leach and his lawyer still contend that Texas Tech owes him millions of dollars for what he was due under his terms. He said they still owe me for 2009. The last time they won 9 games, so maybe they'll deliver the check. Leach said earlier this month, so we'll see what happens. So he kind of called them out a little bit. I know he has nothing personal against the current coaches there or anything like that. He does hold some grudges who used to work there, if they even work there anymore. But I thought that was funny. The last time they won 9 games, which is true, they have beaten teams they shouldn't have, but they have not done well since he has left, and they haven't even gotten to 9. I think this is the first year they'll get to 7 wins at all. So yeah, I mean, as we continue, the reason why this was also brought up, he has offered to settle with Texas Tech for $2.4 million, which would include an $800,000 longevity bonus he was set to receive the day after he was fired, plus about $1.6 million in other incentives that he said he was owed. Leach, he's the winningest coach in Texas Tech history with 84 victories from 2000 to 2009 when he was fired. It's indisputable they owe me the money. No one can dispute that, Leach told ESPN on Monday. When it comes to the money, they don't just owe me the $2.4 million. They actually owe me for 4 more years. But I've always said that I'd settle for the $2.4 million, an acknowledgement that I didn't do anything wrong, which he did. It was never proven. In 2011, Texas Appeals Court ruled Leach couldn't sue for monetary damages because Texas Tech is a state entity with sovereign immunity. The next year, the Texas Supreme Court rejected Leach's appeal without a comment. Leach filed a separate lawsuit against ESPN, then ESPN broadcaster Craig James, with a public relations firm that James had hired, alleging libel and slander. Leach was accused of twice ordering to stand for hours confined in a dark place after he got concussion in 2013. A Texas judge granted summary judgment in favor of ESPN James and the public relations firm. The Texas Supreme Court also denied Leach's appeal in that case. As far as Texas Tech officials, the matter with Leach ended with the court rulings. The court ruled on the Mike Leach matter in 2014. Texas Tech spokesperson said in a statement, "We have resolved the issue and have moved forward. We are excited about the upcoming bowl game and the future of Texas Tech football. Hasn't been good since he left." Still, Leach hasn't let the dispute go. Just last week, his lawyers filed a new lawsuit against Texas Tech in a state district court in Lubbock. The lawsuit, filed on behalf of a consulting firm that investigating Tech on Leach's behalf, accused the university of failing to fulfill its obligations under Texas open record laws. I think at this point, he wants the record to show why he was actually terminated. The circumstances regarding everything were suspicious to begin with, and more we dig, the more suspicious everything seems. I think all he really wants is the truth to come out about what happened 12 years ago and why he was terminated. So we can keep going on. This is not going to be an episode on why he was fired. I think everybody knows he was fired because Craig James at the time was running for congressman. He was an ESPN guy, and his son was a brat, and his son didn't play a lot and didn't get the time he thought he wanted. And Leach should come out, and other coaches have come out and said, he thought, he'd come into practice. Some coaches want his players to dress the same, and it was reported that he didn't. And so just a lot of different things. We all know it was fake. Or brought against him. And then they didn't want to make Craig James angry because he's going to be a congressman or whatever he was running for. But anyway, this is just tip of the iceberg of why this was a big deal. They're suing each other. He's been doing it for years. And again, it's not just about the money. So this was a big deal. And I stayed away from talking about anything about it just because you never know. Texas Tech is a team, since Mike Leach left, has not won 7 or 8 games or 9 games. Cliff Kingsbury was been there. Patrick Mahomes was a quarterback there. Even then, they still couldn't win the same way that Mike Leach could. So I call it the curse of Mike Leach. Now, there are times they compete in games. There's times they do pretty well. And Texas Tech has had their own problems. They fired a coach, and then they hire a new one in November. They have their interim, who was going to be hired as the OC, but then he took a job, I believe, at Louisiana Tech. So a bit up and down, but they had been playing better this year. Mississippi State coming in, year 2 of Mike Leach, or I guess year and a half, because COVID year, they talked about how they couldn't really install things. Then they had an article right before the game. I believe it was right before the game. Or last night. Now, Mississippi State came in. They lost big. They lost 34-7. Now, I'm not saying Texas Tech didn't have players out, but teams left and right have been canceling due to COVID, players testing positive, or just some teams don't want to play, I guess. And I'm not going to speculate. It's been put out there that teams are using this as an excuse. I believe there was a team, it was maybe UCLA or somebody, had like 3 or 4 defensive linemen out and they could play others, but they decided not to. And I thought that was a shame for some teams that wanted players that want to play. But this article, it's titled, I lost track. Mississippi State football was shorthanded and Liberty Bowl down 16 players. So down 16 players. The absences that Mississippi State football started slowly, but the buildup as the Liberty Bowl reached its apex there were heavily felt. By the time the bowl game arrived Tuesday, Coach Mike Leach said he lost track of all the guys that weren't there. The Bulldogs were down 16 players who might have otherwise played roles in the 34-7 loss to Texas Tech due to positive tests. Virus protocols, opt-outs, or injuries. 6 of the players' absent were starters, including left tackle Charles Cross and cornerback Martin Emerson, who declared for the NFL draft. Leach told the Clarion Ledger after the post-game press conference that the coronavirus-related absences began accumulating late last week. And during the stay in Memphis, they kind of trickled on the next couple of days. A team spokesperson said the program doesn't differentiate between how many players were out through illness or injury. But Leach never considered pulling out of the Liberty Bowl, as other teams have done in similar situations. Yeah, I don't want that very much, Leach said. I think you try to play if you can, no matter what, because it's an opportunity to improve, and there's a lot of guys that get to go out there and have some game experience, and certainly the bowl experience, which I think is something special. So I didn't want to pull out if there was any way that we could play. We started losing a couple guys, but I didn't want to pull out of it. Across the country, coronavirus absences have canceled 5 bowl games: the Hawaii Bowl, Military, Fenway, Arizona, and Holiday Bowl. Each was determined the Liberty Bowl wouldn't be added to the list. The Bulldogs' absences were most felt on defense, a unit that allowed Texas Tech to gain 512 yards. But Leach pointed out how Mississippi State played with 2 starting offensive linemen, a complicating factor for an offense that managed its fewest points of the season. Will Rogers threw for a season-low 290 yards and was sacked 4 times, including on consecutive plays late in the fourth quarter, part of the Bulldogs' final push that fell short of making Tuesday's contest close. The 4 other starters missing were right tackle Scott Lashley, safety Jalen Green, and defensive lineman Randy Charlton, and Jaden Crumity. I'm sorry if I said their names wrong. The defensive depth was shattered too, with safeties Dylan Lawrence, Sean Preston, and Kyle Cass absent. Defensive line Aaron Odom and Jack Harris were also missing. Linebacker Aaron Brule and had transferred to Michigan State, and wide receiver Malik Heath had suffered an injury in a car accident. Lashley had started each game this season, and his absence reshuffled the line. Cross had already opted out of the bowl game to prepare for the draft. Then right guard Johnson, I'm not going to try his first name, suffered a leg injury during the game and didn't return. The slew of absences left Mississippi State shorthanded Liberty Bowl, and in the end overpowered. You'll have to let me know what the number was, Leach said, because somewhere in the middle of last week, I lost track. So not to make excuses for this loss, but you have to give Mississippi State and Mike Leach credit that they had these guys out, and they said, screw it, we're going to play. I think Mike Leach is probably the only coach left in America. I mean, I don't know. He always talks about the bowl game. He always talks about how big the bowl game is. You got coaches out there that, well, let me phrase this. You have people out there that don't think the bowl games are important. He has always thought they were important. He always reverts back to his time at Texas Tech, where every single year as he was a head coach, they made the bowl game. And he's highly of that. He taught players to get that bowl experience. That is their quote-unquote playoff. There's their quote-unquote, to show how to get better. You go into the offseason to get better. Maybe it gives you extra film for the draft. If you're younger, it gives you an extra game time experience to figure out a new offense, which they needed the air raid. So, yeah. But they had a ton of guys out, and I didn't look to see about Texas Tech. I'm sure they did too as well. But to have starters out, and it depends. Like, okay, you get a running back out. You have other running backs to put in. You have one wide receiver out now. That's going to matter and impact, but you have other guys. Certain positions, each one is important, but it's very important when you lose a couple safeties. That's big. And you saw in passes, because we're talking a little, Mississippi State just could not stop the run whatsoever. when you look at the stats, we'll look at team stats here. Um, Total yards, I mean, Texas Tech had 512, 260 were rushing. And when you run the ball well, it's just going to open up the pass, unless you're Mike Leach and air raid where it doesn't matter. Then they got 252 through the air, and they had no interceptions. And I don't believe they fumbled. So they had no turnovers. Mississippi State fumbled it twice, or fumbled it twice, threw an interception. So when you give them the ball, this is what's going to happen. But watching the game, literally Texas Tech imposed their will on them in the run game. That offensive line fired off the ball. One, I think tempo really hurt them. When you have time off like that, it's hard to prepare for an up-tempo team. When you're playing game after game each week, you're kind of in shape. When you time off, it's hard to really bounce back, especially when you have, we just talked about all the injuries they had on defense. When you're out your safeties to come down in the run game and tackle. When you're down some of your starting defensive line, which tries to control the line of scrimmage, and you got other defensive guys out. Just watching the game, Texas Tech literally imposed their will. That offensive line fired off the ball, would push guys 2 or 3 yards, and then their running back would break tackles and just run. Mississippi State could not stop a nosebleed, and missing defensive guys that hurt you. And then I don't care what anybody says. As a coach, you try your best to get your second string in, so that way they can be a part of the game plan, know the game plan, so you don't change anything. I don't care what anybody says. More often than not, when you're getting tons of second stringers in, and not just one, but a ton of second stringers in, your game plan tweaks. You still have your overall game plan, but there's certain calls you cannot make. Certain calls are made for specific players. So on defense, if you're missing guys, that's what's going to happen. You cannot call a same defense that you probably would. Man, I'd like to call this coverage and do this and shift this, rotate this guy down here at the last second, do this. We know that we can make this specific call. Well, especially if this could have happened the day before the game, 2 days before the game, it's hard to do it. Now, if it was 2 weeks ago and you knew these guys wouldn't be there, yes, you make the adjustments. But when it's just days ahead, it's very hard to do that. So on defense, Mississippi State just could not stop the run whatsoever. And Texas Tech imposed their will. They did, the up-tempo bothered Mississippi State. And then that opened up the pass. And you saw there was times they made a couple of good deep throws. And when you don't have your safeties out there and some of your leaders out there, deep passes were being made. They couldn't stop the run. So watching the game, it was going to be a long day just watching how they couldn't stop them. And then offensively, when you only have, I believe it was 2 offensive tackles that started coming back in, one, pass protection is hard. Now, I know what people think, and I've already seen it. Well, all they do is pass protect. They don't run, so why are they confused? No, I mean, they tried to run the ball a little bit, believe it or not. But they're not built to run. They're built to pass. They only had 54 yards of rushing. They had 4 penalties, only averaged 2.7 yards. Passing-wise, it was Will Rogers was 32 of 53, 290 yards, touchdown, interception. But here's the thing with offensive line that really hurts when one guy out hurts. But you can figure out when you have to put 3 new guys in, it really hurts. There's a communication with offensive linemen and offensive line coaches. In pass protection, you have to be able to communicate to see where the stunts are, to see where the pressure's coming from. There was times they would stunt. They'd send a guy out and the tackle picked him up, but the guy coming inside on the guard would literally bull rush him into Will Rogers and tackle and all this stuff, tons of it. So Will Rogers getting pressure. He had to block it, which disrupted him a lot. They had to call certain protections. And then, give Texas Tech credit. They knew if they got pressure, if you can get pressure on an air raid team and you can take away the swing route, the linebackers did a really good job on a lot of past concepts, at least that I know of, from an air raid. Not quite Mike Leach's system because he does other things. Running back always swings out. Linebackers flew out there great. They didn't slow down. They were able to protect that. So if you can get pressure, you're able to take away that last route where it's kind of like the oh shit one where you're going to throw it. And then the wide receivers weren't running hard. They had there was times in that first half that Will Rogers threw a good ball and the receivers just dropped it. It's a young team. I believe they said I think most of their touchdowns will be coming back next year. We're all sophomores or something. Like, it's crazy. They're young. And so when you have all that going on, guys being out, trying to get extra reps on defense, and then it's a morale thing of they're just running the ball down our throat. And then on offense, when you're getting pressure because you have a new offensive line staggered there, like when you have different, I think most of us, I've been a part of it where I think this year out of 9 games, I had maybe 3 or 4 times I had the same starting lineup for offensive linemen. Like, you've got to work. You talk to each other on the line, figure out how to block, figure out how to communicate, have your own language about stunts and pickups, what exactly they're in. So it's just hard to bounce back from that. But you got to give Texas Tech credit; they showed up to play. But I think this game, and that's why I stayed away from it. It became Mike Leach versus Texas Tech. Which, yeah, that's why it was exciting. That's why I wanted to watch. I'm sure that's why everybody else wanted to watch. But it became that big thing. And I think you have to give Mike Leach and Mississippi State credit for playing anyway, because they could have easily canceled. Now, he's not going to make mistakes. He's going to say, hey, guys have to go out there and play, next guy up. So he's not going to make excuses of how they lost. Texas Tech just came out ready to play, saying, we want to be an SEC team. Their coach, their interim coach, was leaving. I think he was doing 2 things. He's trying to be a head coach at a new school, trying to recruit, but he was doing things there, and I think they really respect him for it. Like, he's not leaving; he's staying here to help out. And he was going to be hired there as an offensive coordinator, but when a head job comes along, and you want to try to take that step, he wanted to take it. But to fight for the players was fantastic. So it was just a tough game overall for Mississippi State. They couldn't stop the run. Passing game, they really played good coverage. That's how you beat them. If you've got some guys, how you beat them, Mike Leach can call up a play to combat any coverage you have. But the quarterback doesn't have time to throw it. If the guys in coverage are doing a good job and they just have better safeties or better safeties and corners and stuff more than the wide receivers, you're going to beat them. You're going to combat with them. So, hats off to Texas Tech. I was really wanting Mike Leach to beat them, to say like an FU to Texas Tech, but it's been so many years since this has happened. I hope he wins in the courts. But I already had this planned as a podcast of, if they win, the Pirate steals gold and stuff like that. But it wasn't meant to be. If Mississippi State was at full strength, I think they could have squeaked this out. It at least would have been a closer game. But season's over. Mississippi State's got to move on, lick their wounds. Poor Mike Leach. But yeah, so good for you, Texas Tech, getting the win. I do not root for them really anymore. I like their offense. I like what they were doing, the way they were running the ball and everything. But ever since they did that to him. But now let's move on to end this podcast up. I am on publication somewhere, whether it's this podcast, Coach Sheffer's podcast. Go check him out, the Armchair Coaching Podcast or something. Was not a fan of the firing of Coach Gus Malzahn from Auburn. I understood it because we talked about the Bears and Nagy, about you have to have consistent success, and each team wants to win a championship. That's the goal, and you have to always have success, whether it's wins and losses, whether it's production on the field, college, if you're constantly getting good recruits, if you're constantly having a good defense, everything like that. Well, last year, I believe Auburn is paying Gus $21 million. Yes, one of these articles. Why is Auburn paying Gus Malzahn $21.7 million to walk away? They said offensive woes top the list. So I was not the biggest fan of the firing. I understood it. Well, in this bowl game, Auburn made a bowl game. They had to play Houston, and they did not pull it out. Houston got the late touchdown because Auburn was up 13-10. Houston marches down, who I said is not a bad team. They did go 12-2. They beat an SEC team. Late touchdown to win 17-13. Auburn did not have Bo Nix for the last few games. He has transferred to Oregon. Auburn ends up being 6-7 under Coach Harrison's first year as a head coach. And already, I want to start by saying this, just because I'm titling this, should they have fired Coach Gus Malzahn? Some people have already said Coach Harrison's going to leave or he needs to be fired. No, you don't do that year one unless you're Urban Meyer. Unless you have an Urban Meyer type season, that does not happen. So let's just stop that right now. This is not me saying he needs to go at all. But what I'm saying is, should they have let Gus go? Gus is a great offensive mind, had great teams, good offenses. Should they have gotten rid of him? Now, Auburn, if we want to look at their schedule, and let's talk about it. Okay. Well, regular season, they play some team I don't even know, AKR, and they won 60-10. Alcorn State 62-0. So they got this offense thing going, but the teams they're playing are inferior. Then they play a real team in Penn State and lose 28-20. Then they play Georgia State, who's a good team. They beat them 34-24. Beat LSU, who has played well, and I think Ed should still have his job. But they won 24-19, so close games. Then they lose to Georgia 34-10. Then they beat Arkansas, which was a huge time win, 38-23. Nobody saw that coming. Then they beat Ole Miss 31-20. Bo Nix was playing well. Offensive line was playing well. They were running the ball well. Then they go on this long stretch. Lose to Texas A&M 20-3. They lose to Mississippi State 43-34 when they let Mississippi State score like 40 straight points. Then you lose to South Carolina 21-17. Then you play Alabama close 24-22. Tough schedule. Then you lose to Houston without Bo Nix. Okay. So you play a lot of teams close, but to me, this seems like another Gus season. That's what I'm getting at. Okay. Now I know after a few years, you're kind of in the same spot. Okay. But some Auburn people are smarter than others. There are some podcasts out there, some really smart Auburn commentators and fans, and they talk about Auburn has this high standard. They've got to win 10 to 12 games a year. I'm not saying that, but I do get it that after like 7 years or so, you're only winning 8 to 9 games every year. And you got to take the next step forward. What you're seeing on the field, I get it. That's why I understood it. But at the same time, like, who were you going to get there? Coach Harrison did a good job at Boise State, but really this type of season that we're seeing with the offensive numbers and everything seems just like another Gus team. Now, we'll get to some things that Gus did wrong outside looking in. Like I said, I have no factual evidence on this, but Auburn goes 6-7 and loses to Houston in a bowl game. Okay. So let's look at Gus got hired at UCF. Okay. Let's look at their record. They end up going 9-4. Okay. Beat Coach Harrison's old team, Boise State. Then they beat BCU. Okay. Then they lose to Louisville. Louisville is a bigger program. Lose to them 42-35. Then they lose to Navy 34-30. They beat East Carolina. Then they lose to Cincinnati, who's in the college football playoff. Then they beat Memphis, Temple, close game against Tulane. They lose to SMU, we all know they can click that offense on no matter what. They beat UConn, obviously. Then they beat USF. Then they beat, in the bowl game, Florida. Now, Florida had people out and whatever. UCF had players hurt all year. All year. And then people want to say, well, this is one of their down years, being 9-4. They only won 6 games last year. So he actually got them forward. They're joining the Big 12. They are a tough football team. And Gus seems rejuvenated. He's back to calling the offense. He's back to doing that. So UCF had a better season. Now, obviously, Auburn had a tougher schedule. But you bring in Coach Harrison to try to heal what was going on with Auburn. Well, Gus isn't quite getting it done. Well, let's look at Gus's time at Auburn. Started 2013. He goes 12-2 and loses in the championship game. And then he goes 8-5, 7-6, 8-5, 10-4, 8-5, 9-4, Then he got fired after going 6-4. They were Bo Nix. He's young and everything else. Then at UCF, now he's 9-4. So his time at Auburn, he was 103 games. Sorry, he was 68-35 out of 103 games. So his win percentage was .66. He beat Alabama 3 to 4 times, I believe. So to me, this just seems like another Gus team. So if we look at this article, Auburn fires Gus after 68-35 record in 8 seasons. He signed a 7-year, $49 million 2 seasons before that. He was 68-35 in 8 seasons as the coach of the Tigers. He was 39-27 in the SEC. He led Auburn to an SEC championship victory and appearance in the championship game in his first season. They lost national title 34-31 to Florida State. Auburn won the SEC West in 2017, and he entered the SEC championship game with a college football playoff berth within reach, only to fall to Georgia in that game and go on to lose to UCF in the Peach Bowl. Malzahn is one of the rare coaches who has seen consistent success against Alabama and Coach Nick Saban. He had a 3-5 record in the 8 Iron Bowl meetings, 48-45 win in 2019. Then, they weren't going to beat Alabama the next time. Auburn had issues with consistency through Malzahn's last 5 years. It hasn't finished higher than 6th in the conference in offensive yards per play over the last 6 seasons. And the only time it finished higher than 6th in total offense was the SEC West title year of 2017 when they averaged 451.6 yards per game. That's especially concerning since Malzahn's literally wrote a book about the success of hurry up, no huddle offense. That trend continued in his final game with the program on Saturday night. The Tigers gained just 343 yards and a 24-10 road win over Mississippi State. So they fire him over offensive woes. Okay. So offensive woes, and so they're supposed to bring in Coach Harrison, and they're supposed to do great, right? Total points per game this year for Auburn was 27.8. Total points, they scored 362. Okay. So they averaged 27 yards a game. This seems like a Gus Malzahn type of team. Okay. I'm just saying. They averaged 6.9 pass yards. They averaged 4.7 yards on the ground. They averaged 161.2 rushing yards a game. Net passing yards per game, 240. So let's try to compare that to UCF with Coach Malzahn back there calling plays. They averaged 31.9 points a game. They had 415 total points. Net passing yards, 206. Average 196 rushing yards a game. Yards per game, 402. Total yards, 5,232. Sounds to me like they had a better offensive time. Now, again, understand the scheduling. It just seems very similar to a Gus team. Now, what they're talking about the last 5 years, here's what happens. When you do good for a little bit, and then it just slightly comes down, it's an immediate, oh my God, like, it's terrible. I mean, he's winning 8 to 10 games a year, 7 to 10 games a year. In the SEC, which is very tough, he found a way to get to he did some good things. Now, I've talked about on Coach Shepard's podcast, so this is why I think he was fired. There was just times where he called plays when they first got there and they did pretty well. Then it got to a point where he wanted to kind of be the CEO, which is great. Head coaches sometimes just want to sit back, be a CEO. And there's just reports of he'd let a guy call offense and be the first half of the season. All of a sudden, he wanted to take it back over. And then he hired an offensive coordinator, but then they weren't running things the way he thought that he wanted. Didn't mix well with what he wanted and the other guy wanted, so he would kind of take over. I believe at UCF, he just went back to what he knew, what he did, and it worked out pretty well. So I think I'm going to call plays. No, he's going to call plays. Kind of we're seeing with like the Bears that you guys hear me talk about all the time. I believe that's kind of what was going on, and they didn't like what they were seeing. So, like I said, I understand it to an extent, even though you're paying him $21 million. If you're going to pay a guy $21 million, you might as well just keep him and say, okay, let's try to win some games. He's beating Nick Saban. He's done some good things. We score points. We have some offense. But also, I think that Gus was feeling pressure from Auburn. What was he hearing? There was the scandal of, I believe it was Coach Steele calling for his job behind his back. So there was just a lot of things going on that forced this. And that's why I think at UCF he feels rejuvenated. They did pretty well this year. So that type of thing, I kind of caused things to kind of derail a little bit. But just from what I've heard of, well, let's bring a guy in to fix everything. Well, this season kind of seemed like a Gus Malzahn type of thing, and then you hear about, well, on offense, we're going under center, we're doing this, we're doing that. Gus did get away from a little bit from what gave them success. You didn't see a whole ton of buck sweep stuff. They kind of went to inside zone, which, yeah, they run inside zone, but they did a lot of wide zone, inside zone stuff. Then at UCF, they kind of got back to, okay, let's do buck sweeps, maybe some pin and pulls. We're going to run power. We're going to run a little bit of inside zone, but we're going to do things to run the ball. We're still going to go up tempo. We're going to get a lot of fullbacks involved, H-backs involved, RPOs off of that, play actions off of that. Recruiting was a big thing when he was at Auburn, but again, I think he's at a place now where he can kind of rejuvenate and figure out, okay, I did this wrong at Auburn. I'm going to do the right thing at UCF. We're going to go to the Big 12. We're going to try to win. We're going to have this offense put back. And I think sometimes people just look too much of one thing or another. Oh, they're not scoring all these points. It's bad. Oh, they're not getting enough yards, but they're winning. Like I said, they only had 300 some yards on that one, but they won 24-10. So they're comparing it to the yards. Like, well, this isn't happening. This isn't happening. I don't know. Should they have fired him? Maybe. But then don't come around and say, well, this guy's going to fix everything in this year one. And then, now, like I said, there's people out there, especially that do podcasts, that came out and said Auburn's going to be 6, 7, 8 wins team, and they were correct. I'm not talking about those type of people. Those type of people understand college football. Those type of people have coached football. They get it. But there are people out there that said Auburn was going to be this big team, that Coach Harrison was going to come in and do this. This just seems like another Gus type of thing. And Gus is a great offensive mind, just made some mistakes along the way. So that's why I understand the firing. So I'll leave it up to you of should they have fired him or got rid of him or anything else. But UCF had a great year. Auburn had a normal year for them, I guess, if you look at that. They won a championship with Cam Newton, and then I don't know if they really have. I mean, I'm sure they have. But again, this isn't Clemson. This isn't Alabama. This isn't Ohio State. So Auburn, I think, should be happy winning 7 to 10 games a year, especially playing in the SEC. I think that's where you're going to be at. I don't see you winning a national championship yet. Got to see how he recruits. And that was another thing, Gus, the quarterback now, but see, in his offense, quarterback is huge in any offense, but in his offense, running the ball wasn't huge for his quarterback. But then, like I said, as it went on, you saw more 2x2 stuff, 3x1 stuff, empty stuff in this offense because Gus was trying to tweak the offense. The offense coordinator slipped in my mind that he hired as last year. They tried to combine the offenses, which wasn't working well. You had two different minds. So just things were done, and I think Gus can learn from them. But I'll leave it up to you if they should have let him. To me, this Auburn year just looked like another Gus year. So to me, it's like, well, you could have had this with Gus. Maybe you would have won some more games. That's just kind of what I'm getting at is another Gus year you could have won. But anyway, so that's how we're going to end this podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Again, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Audio version, please follow it, share it out, rate it, be a friend, tell a friend. Check out all the affiliates in the description below. Check out all the other podcasts. Hope everybody's having a good holiday. We're getting closer to the new year. Gonna try to do something. We're ticking upwards. We're gonna get to 300 episodes here before we know it. Maybe try to do some type of giveaway if somebody wants to. If you guys know anything, please let me know. So again, check out all the affiliates, like and subscribe, rate it, everything else. Thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, this is Coach Steve from the Coach Steve Show podcast, and we are out of here.